So today we're looking at the faith of a child, faith like a child. And then if Ben and I came up, well, actually, he came up with the idea of why don't we focus more on kids this holiday season? And so we're doing that. And so today I'm going to follow through with that idea. So let me just start this way. You know, precious little potential adults, tiny packages of dynamite, imagination factories, rugrats, Klingons, curtain climbers, the words that we use oftentimes for little ones. But whatever you call them, you know what? They're the reasons we have balloons, ice cream, and cake. They're the reasons we have these playgrounds, that we do lawn sprinklers in the summer. They're the reasons we have Easter egg hunts. And you know, they're the ones who turn mothers into mommies and fathers into daddies. They can turn a tear into a smile in 12 seconds flat. They can take an immaculately clean house and turn it into a dump in less time than that. They're truth tellers, they're chaos creators, they're heartbreakers, they're memory makers. These are what kids are. You know, in about a space of 9 months, they can accomplish what grandparents in 2 decades could never accomplish with their children. They turn 20 something party animals into responsible, church going, bill paying adults. They turn spenders into savers, leavers into stayers, pagans into prayers. All because we want something better for these kids. You know what? They leave fingerprints on our windows, they leave fingerprints on our hearts. They're a gift. They really are. They're a gift of the Lord. And of all the things that He created, I'm pretty well convinced was He considered His most precious creation. You know why? Because when they pop out, they're perfect. Just ask any mama, right? The most beautiful and the most perfect that's ever been born. And you know what you say? Oh, they're so precious. That way you don't get in trouble. You just say they're precious. You avoid all that. So this morning we're going to look at kids. We're going to look at their faith and how we should be emulating that. So if you have your Bibles, go to Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 5. It's going to show up on the screen as well. I'll just read it from there. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And He called a little child to Him and placed the child among them. And He said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." The story is told of a Sunday school teacher who asked the kids to do a picture about Christmas, one of their favorite Bible stories. And so this little boy, Kyle, he draws this big fancy picture, and there's 4 people on this airplane. And then she comes around, she goes, "Well, tell me the story." He said, "Well, it's obvious. It's the flight to Egypt." She said, "Well, Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus, I get. Who was that 4th? Well, that's Pontius, the pilot." I mean, it's silly, right? But kids hear things differently. They see things differently. Things that we assume. I mean, the flight, right? Whoever would have thought? It's a flight on an airplane. Another little girl was sitting on her grandpa's lap, and I can imagine my grandkids doing that. And he was reading a book to him, which is what good grandpas should do, by the way. If you're not into that, you need to be doing that. You read a book, and she would reach up and she would touch his face. And then she'd touch her own face. And she said finally, she said, "Grandpa, did God create you?" And he says, "Well, yes, honey, God did make me, but it was a long time ago." And so she kept looking and rubbed his face again, and then her back to her face. And she said, "Grandpa, did God make me too?" He says, "Yes, honey, He did, but not too long ago for you." She looked at him. She says, "God's getting better at it, isn't He?" Again, just that preciousness of kids. Those are memory type things. Somebody says something like that, you don't forget it. I mean, we have fingerprints on our sliding glass door. I keep saying, Janice, let's watch this. No, they're the grandkids. Okay, got it. Okay. So now we're going to focus on the children, but I just want to let you see what Jesus did first. At the beginning of that passage, they asked him, who will be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Well, Jesus said, unless you change, repent. And he was basically warning them, guys, this is totally the wrong direction. You focus on that, you're going down the wrong path. Because that is not what is considered greatness in my kingdom. Now, if a man or a woman is just focusing at personal ambition, our acquisition of power, of money, of things, he's aiming, or we are aiming precisely in the wrong direction. So I'm bringing this up because this is actually repeated in 3 of the Gospels where it talks about this, where they always ask the same question, who's the greatest? And they're always fighting over that too. Guys, competition, right? We always do that. And we butt heads and we think, well, we're more important or whatever. And Jesus is saying, no, you're missing it totally. That is not what's going on. One other thing I want to point out, though, what Jesus is saying is to be childlike and not to be childish. I think we have a major issue in our culture right now about people being childish. Now, the definition of that is essentially this: being silly, trifling, immature, self-indulgent, babyish, irresponsible. And when I hear about 30-somethings that are living in their parents' basements, living off of their parents, not working, playing their games all the time, their computer games and so forth, my thought is that is childish. Matter of fact, I don't know if you heard about this, but Fetterman, this senator who was supposedly elected in Pennsylvania, he's been doing all of his life? Living in his parents' basement, playing games. How he ever got to be a senator, forgive me, but I question that one a lot. The point is, though, that's not what Jesus is calling us to be childish, but to be childlike. And it's not just us, by the way. This happened in Ukraine, too. I saw it all the time. Where, as individuals, I mean, maybe as the parents, we haven't done a good job in training our children. I'm not sure what that is, but in some way or another, they're not responsible. They're not willing to take it on themselves. So when Jesus said we need to become like little children, he doesn't mean to act selfish or to throw tantrums. Because even those 30-year-olds I've seen do that before, haven't you? Because they don't get their way. God has so much to give us and to teach us and lead us, and I hope that we never get bored to the point that we're not really following after what he wants. So what are we supposed to be like? Well, first of all, in this passage, it gives us a good clue. First of all, we're supposed to be humble. We need to be humble. A child's humility, I don't know if you noticed these little ones that were up here. Did you see what was going on? Ava was standing back behind, right? Wasn't she? And she didn't want to. And I forgot Arthur, right? He wanted to be hugged. The other one, what's his name? Albert. He didn't care. But none of them wanted to be up front. They already innately can understand what humility is about. It's not about them. They're not pushing themselves forward. In fact, they want to be behind. That's what humility is. And Jesus said, if you don't change and become like the child, in other words, have humility, you can't get into the kingdom. It's not about you. There was a 3-year-old, and I don't know if you've been around these, but they love to play games, especially the ones that they can beat the adult at, right? Like Go Fish. This one little girl, she was good at it. And so she was beating the adult just left and right. And then she started bragging about it. Well, I am so good, and dancing, and doing all those things. And the parent, I don't know if it was grandparent or mom or dad, and they said, well, I guess we're going to have to teach you a little bit about humility. And she looked up and she goes, how do you play that? She didn't know what it was. But most times, a kid doesn't even need to be taught what humility is. Humility, Merriam-Webster says, it's freedom from pride or arrogance. And in the scriptures, we see a very plain example of that. Romans 12, chapter 3. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. but rather think of yourselves with sober judgment in accordance with the faith that God has distributed to each of you. Humility is really a spiritual modesty. When we understand we don't have any control over life, we're not the most important things going on around us, that we don't have everything figured out. Plus, it's in the context of understanding the larger, bigger things related to God. For instance, His church and His mission. It's not our desires. It's not about us. Billy Graham tells a story when he was young. He went into a small town and he was getting ready to preach. And he needed to mail a letter off. And so he asked a little boy he happened to see along the street. He says, where's the post office? And he said, oh, down the street. You can see it right there. Okay, thank you. He says, and Billy says to him, well, if you come tonight to the First Baptist Church, you can hear me preach about how to find salvation. The little boy looks up and he goes, why would I come? He goes, well, because I'm going to be preaching. He goes, you don't even know how to find the post office. Why would I come? You don't know how to find salvation. Okay, well, in some ways, Bill, a little bit blunt, right? But that's what humility is sometimes too. Sometimes we need our pride taken down a little bit. And in some ways, I like the fact that kids say what they think. It challenges us because we often don't say what we think, or we hide behind things. Kids don't do that, which leads us to the second. Kids have this quality of innocence that we all need. Now, I'm not suggesting that children don't make mistakes. Even this little one, I'm sure, has already gotten to the point where they figured out how to manipulate grandma and grandpa, right? Mom and dad, other people around them. You guys have them. There's lots of people in here. We all know that, and that's okay. I'm not suggesting that. But there is still this idea of innocence. It's something that we need. We forget it. We've forgotten it. Why are we innocent? So Romans 16:9 says this, everyone has heard about your obedience, so I rejoice because of you, but I want you to be wise about what is good and innocent about what is evil. I want you to be innocent. And in Philippians 2:14-16, do everything without complaining and arguing so that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in the world, a world full of crooked and perverse people. Sounds like our world right now, doesn't it? Children are innocent. They love justice. As a matter of fact, they expect things to be set right. I've heard story. I've seen it actually with my grandkids, where one of the grandkids will hurt the other grandkid. And so you try to comfort the first grandkid, and they're crying still because the kid who offended them hasn't said, I'm sorry. And when they do, all of a sudden, all is forgiven, and they can go back to playing again, just like normal, right? That whole idea of innocence, we need that. There was Frederick the Great was a Prussian king years and years ago, and he was touring a prison. And when he came to the prisoners, they all fell on their knees and were crying out, I'm innocent, I shouldn't be here, shouldn't be here, except for one guy in the back. And Frederick turned to him, he says, sir, what are you in here for? Armed robbery. Are you guilty or are you innocent? He says, no, I'm guilty. I deserve what I got. And he turns to the jailkeeper and he says, jailkeeper, let that man out. I don't want his bad actions influencing all these innocent people in here. Now, that's not what we're talking about. But that innocence in who we are as people. Innocence in the experiences that we share, that we have in this world. Innocence in not indulging in stupid things, forgive me, or evil things, or adapting to those, or giving approval to those evil things. But innocence is regards to evil. What Jesus says, what God says, that's what we go with, because it gives life. The other, we already know what evil gives, don't you? It takes you to death. That's why Satan came. There was a little boy going home from Sunday school one Sunday, and had this beautiful card that he'd written, and the picture and the caption read, have faith in God. Well, he was looking at it, as little boys or little girls will do, and the wind grabbed it and threw it out the window. He says, wait, I've lost my faith in God. Well, the bus driver stopped, let him go get it. And one of the adults smiled and made a comment about the innocence of youth. And the more perceptive adult said this: all of us would be better off if we were that concerned about our faith. And it's true. Are we concerned about that innocence? Children are. They look at it. That's part of why I believe Jesus invited the kids. He wanted the disciples to see. I mean, it's typical of how we are even during this time of Christmas, right? Stories told of a lady who was running around trying to find Christmas gifts. I've been there, you've done that. And the little boy was with her, had his hand in her hand. Well, she got to one part of the store and realized he wasn't there anymore. She runs back to where he was, had his nose pressed up against a window, and he was gazing at a manger scene. And he heard his mom's cry, and he turned and shouted, "Hey, Mommy, it's Jesus, baby Jesus in the hay." And with really anger and frustration, she turned and she grabbed him and she said, "We don't have time for that." Unfortunately, I think that's the issue in our world. We don't have time for that because it's all about us. It's all about our greatness. It's all about our possessions. It's not about God. Fourth, there's this whole thing about dependence of trust. And God has a real sense, has created that within kids, this trust in adults. I mean, that's why I wish the kids weren't here. But do you remember when you were little? When you were 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, even to probably when I was maybe 15, I didn't worry about where the food came from. It just appeared on the table, right? I didn't even think about electricity. I had to think about wood because I had to split it and help cut it. But I didn't think about that. I didn't think about car insurance, health insurance, pensions. I didn't think about any of that stuff. Did you? None of us. Why? We were dependent. As a matter of fact, on the tax form, it says dependents, right? Assuming there are people in your household who are dependent on you. Kids are dependent. And you know what? They think it's normal, don't they? Why is it that we as adults don't think it's normal to be dependent on the Lord? Why? Do we trust Him or do we not trust Him? They're instinctively dependent. Now, these guys, they were wanting to, or that is, those who asked the question of Jesus, who is the greatest? They were thinking based on whatever they did, they would be greatest, or based on who they were with, that is, assuming Jesus was the conquering Messiah. When the truth is that Jesus wanted them to be dependent on God, the Father, then He would make them great, just as a child can be great. We need to be emptying ourselves of ourselves and relying on the Lord. Now, the Jews use that word child, the word child in two different ways. One was as a little kid. The other, though, was as a disciple. So when Jesus is saying that, unless you become like children, He's saying, guys, if you don't simplify your life, if you don't come down to that level, don't even think about getting into heaven. It ain't going to happen. You need to be like that little one. Innocent, trusting, dependent. In Matthew 19, the chapter right after where we just read in verses 13 and 14, it says, one day some parents brought their children to Jesus so that He could lay hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples scolded the parents for bothering Him. That doesn't fit with my idea of Jesus. And Jesus said, let the little children come to me. Don't stop them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who are like these children. And He placed His hands on their heads and blessed them before He left. As Jesus followers, folks, where is our trust? Are we expecting Him to move? Janice and I read a book this last week. By the way, we just got back from Hawaii, and it was great. So on the way, we were reading this book, and it was called Women Who Risk. And it was primarily about Muslim women in the Muslim world who Jesus has revealed Himself. They've come to Christ, and He has just transformed their lives. And by the way, this is happening in Iran, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. They have churches, and God is moving. Who do you think they're dependent on? their wisdom, their churches, their abilities to do things. No, they have learned that they trust Jesus. It's the person of Jesus, or it's the relationship with Jesus that makes all the difference. I mean, why, if we can trust him, listen to what Romans 8:28 says. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. In other words, to those who are dependent and trusting in God, he's going to take care of us. Is he not taking care of any one of you because of that? Or in Hebrews 13:5, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. We need that childlike faith, folks. The writer of the song, O Little Town of Bethlehem, he was a really popular preacher and teacher back in his day. And one day after he died, this little 5-year-old girl who happened to love that pastor a lot, she went up to her mom and said, Mom, how happy the angels will be because he's with them. You know, how happy God will be when we're with him. I mean, that attitude again, that innocence. Ralph Waldo Emerson said this once about children. He says, there was never a child so lovely, but that his mother wasn't thrilled when she got him to sleep, right? Never. In the dictionary, one dictionary, they define boy as a noise with dirt on it. A noise with dirt on it. And Irma Bombeck, she said, there's nothing sadder in this world than to wake up Christmas morning and not be a child. Now, I take that to mean not literally a child, but to have that faith of a child, recognizing who Jesus is and what he came for in this world. And lastly, I want to just deal with this, the whole focus of what Jesus said to the disciples. He said, unless you repent, that is, unless you change, you will not enter the kingdom and become like that child. You will not come into the kingdom of God. In each one of those passages that I mentioned, Matthew 18:19, Mark 9, Luke 9, and Luke 18, in each one of those, the disciples are present and they're asking, who's greatest? And each time, Jesus points to a child and explains access and success. So what is it about children? You know, I already pointed out that they're three children, they don't want to be in front. But you know, I do notice something. We got Alex back here. You know what he loves to do? I see him do it every Sunday. What is it? He does. I'll call it something else. He serves. He wants to serve. He wants to be involved. Kids want to be involved in what's going on. It's us who are the consumers. Oh, gimme, gimme, gimme. I like it. I mean, you know what? I haven't watched Christmas movies in years because we haven't had time. Well, we've watched 2 of them in the last 3 or 4 nights. And it's like something almost seems wrong with that. I'm not saying we shouldn't watch Christmas movies, but what are we doing to serve other people? We used to do Christmas carols. Remember those days? We'd get in the cars and head down wherever we were and get out and start singing until somebody'd complain or whatever it was, or we got tired and we'd go someplace else, right? That's what we used to do. Or we'd walk around the neighborhoods just singing at the top of our lungs about Jesus. Finding ways to serve people. And I think ultimately we need to think about our own change in this whole process. Are we going to stay consumers or are we going to be servants? Are we going to do what Jesus wants or are we going to do what we want? You know, sometimes we get caught in this trap. Well, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. Even though it's not great, at least it's predictable and I know what's going to happen. Right? Rather than take a risk, like that book I was mentioning, Women Who Take Risks, and doing something that's outside of our comfort zone. You know, I've noticed this about kids. Let's say you got a new child that comes into a group of kids and they're playing. What do they do normally? Well, they'll come up and they'll sit and they'll stand and they'll watch for a few minutes. And then they'll say, can I play? Right? That's what they do. Very humble. They're not trying to force their way. You'll find once in a while those kids. But most of the time, they're very humble about that, and they'll do it. Or they'll watch, and I see this at my daughters all the time, they'll be watching Dad make some sourdough bread, and he'll be putting it together, or else Mama will be making dinner, and the first thing they say is, can I help? Can I help? Can I help? And they'll get up there and watch. Can I do that? Can I do that? They want to be involved in life. Folks, let me put it even more personal. How many of you have grandchildren and friends and others who can do computers a lot better than you can? Yeah? They know it. They're not afraid. Folks, we need to learn from our children about that. It's really easy for us to get stuck in a rut. You know the 7 last words of a dying church? We've never done it that way before. We need to be willing to change, to repent, as you will, and do what Jesus asks us. You know, the word change for some of us is kind of like having a skunk at a barbecue. You know, it's like just out of place, like a bunch of nuns going to a Britney Spears concert. I mean, it just doesn't fit, right? We need to do new things. Unless you change, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Unless you change, you'll never experience his power. Unless you change, you'll miss out on the work, the mission, the call that he has for us. Unless we change, we'll never be a part of what God is doing in this world. Unless you change, unless we change, we're never going to leave our fingerprints of faith on our communities. What is it that we're going to do? How can we do that? So I would just challenge you, don't be afraid when you get asked to do something that doesn't quite fit your concept. Maybe we'll pull all these pews out, or the chairs out of here next week, and make you all stand all service long. That'd be different, right? Or as we did this a few years ago, we had the stage was up here. The next Sunday, we didn't tell anybody. The stage was over there. What? Where's my pew? And then the pews disappeared. And then we switched everything around so it faces this way. Nobody was happy for a while. You remember those days? Not that they weren't happy, and forgive me, I'm exaggerating. We need to just recognize that what Jesus has asked us to do has so much more. Matter of fact, remember in John 3:16 when Nicodemus goes to see Jesus, and Jesus says, unless you are born again. What? Born again? How can a man be born again? Unless we become like those children, we're going to miss out. We're going to miss out. So I would really encourage you tomorrow night, 6:30, be here to watch this children's program. Let the kids minister to us. Let's see how they are doing things. One woman was told about a church play that was going on, and her young daughter, Jana, was super excited. She came home and she says, Mom, I have the main part in this play, the Christmas play. And she thought, well, probably Mary, right? And she said, well, Jana, what part is it? I can't tell you. And so for the whole week, she never told her mom what her part was. And her mom's going crazy. Finally, they get to the play time, and here they are. And the teacher begins by narrating the story. And she says, a long time ago, Mary and Joseph had a baby, and they named him Jesus. And when Jesus was born, a bright star appeared over the stable. And at that moment, Jana got up, picked up a broom handle with this big star on it, and started bouncing it around. Well, as the teacher continued going, the shepherds came, and so Jana got more excited, showing where that star was, so that the shepherds would know where to come in. When the play ended and they had refreshments, and on the way home, Jana said, Mom, it was great. I had the main part in the whole thing. And she said, you did? And she goes, yes, because I got to show everybody how to find Jesus. Folks, Jesus has commissioned the apostles, the disciples, but he's also commissioned us. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all ethnic groups, all peoples, all nations. That word is interchangeable. So let's do it. Let's be like those kids. Humble, innocent, trusting, and dependent, creating a light, lifting up that star so that all people can find it.